So what do you do if somebody wants you to write in Romantic style? Well, the first thing to remember is that most Romantic texts are poems, so you'll have to think about whether or not you're going to go for it and write a narrative poem. But either way, your setting will be important. So you might think about medieval churches, cathedrals and castles, anything that's sort of steeped in grandiose history, larger than life sort of places. Focus on things like mysterious lakes, rivers, dark forests, statuary, knights, men of religion, abandoned ruins, courtyards, tapestries, or even, like we have in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, ghost ships. So you're looking for places that are going to combine elements of perhaps the supernatural, the medieval, and the natural. When you come to your main character, you might pick a hero, like straightforward, sort of like your knights of old, or a Byronic hero. Now, Byronic hero is named after Lord Byron, who, it's not so much named after the characters he wrote about, he was a Romantic poet, it's actually more named after his own personality. So the Byronic hero is a bad-tempered individualist, usually somebody of high birth who's very proud and stuck up, rather like Lord Byron, and so someone that is essentially good but behaves in a way that's counter to society. Your other option is a wicked, sinful man. Your heroes will have medieval senses of honour and chivalry, so they'll be very straightforward in their typecasting there. A sinful man is probably going to be given a lesson in morality, often by supernatural intervention. And again, that's the sort of thing you'll see if you look at the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The other thing to keep in mind when you're writing in the Romantic is that you want to pick very ornate language. So never go with a simplified phrase if you can go for a more complex one. They're very big on what we call purple prose. So rather than saying that she had a beautiful face, you might say she had ruby lips and her eyelids were encrusted with frost of 1,000 diamonds. It's that kind of stuff. So it's probably what we would consider a little over the top. Your characters may also be immortal, tormented for eternity, or stuck outside the normal passage of time. So again, you're playing with the imagination and notions of fantasy as well. Another sort of hang-up of the Romantics is how the character looks. So a hero must be handsome and well-spoken. The reason for this is that external appearance is thought to reflect your inner soul. So if you're a beautiful person or a handsome person, you're good on the inside, and if you're ugly on the outside, you must be evil on the inside. So, following that theory, a bad man will have a disfiguring element like a hunch or a scar. Dark hair and green eyes, like the lovely Lord Byron over there, are popular choices for both good guys and bad guys. So, what about the Gothic? Writing the Gothic style is a very common assignment for Year 10 and 11. You may have already had to look at it. Again, it's similar to the Romantic in terms of emotion and trepidation and trying to get a feeling of either wonder or fear going, but it's got slightly different conventions. So your setting might be a family mansion, again, an old church is okay, but it's often in an isolated location a little bit removed from reality. So it might be a monastery on an island or a really remote village far away. The best Gothic tales suggest the supernatural rather than actually spelling it out for you. So what you wouldn't necessarily see the monster. It's kind of like monster movies today. The scariest part of the movie is always when things are getting crunched or broken before you see a clear shot of the monster. Once you've seen it, it's kind of not scary anymore. So that's the same with the Gothic. So you're going to slowly build tension so that you get more and more sure that there's something after you. Other things you might think about including are pipe organs, ghost stories that are being told by old characters in the story. Perhaps if you're staying in the family mansion, there could be a family history of suicide or insanity. Long corridors filled with twists and turns and shadows. Or even a nice piece of cursed jewellery. So thinking about things that are going to really impact the reader in terms of setting up a vibe or a tone to the story. Your character, you have kind of a choice. Early Gothic is going to have a male protagonist, while your later, more Victorian style Gothic is going to probably have a female protagonist who becomes an innocent victim. The main character is going to be someone who firmly does not believe in the supernatural. And so that means we can empathize with her because we're, not necessarily believing the supernatural either. But over time, she or he will become gradually more and more convinced that supernatural does exist, perhaps even going mad. So this presents a really interesting question. Is the character going mad because they're being shown the supernatural, or are they seeing the supernatural because they're going mad? So it leaves an element of doubt and interest and mystery that the reader feels like they have to solve, and it keeps them interested in the story. So your main character will be rational, conservative, and repressed, and they'll give more way to fear and panic as the plot progresses. So generally it will be written in first person with a limited view of what's going on, and perhaps the emotional tone will get more and more erratic as the story continues. A male protagonist could be an investigator, an historian, or a scientist. So someone who has a reason for being there and also a rigid academic background behind them, so that when they start believing in the supernatural, it actually seems like a reassuring and realistic thing to happen. A female protagonist is most likely to be serving the middle class, like a maid or a governess. So that kind of character is going to be someone who has no husband, they're going to be isolated, and possibly even in a new environment, which is going to make them even more vulnerable to whatever's going to happen. So if you have to read or write in the Romantic, here are the few that you should really be aware of. The first is the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. We've already mentioned it a lot. It has a lot to do with forming opinions of what's in the Romantic. It is a little on the long side for a poem, but you'll see millions and millions of quotes in it that you've heard repeated in other stories. So it's worthwhile because of its influence. You should also have a look at The Tiger by William Blake, which is short and sweet. To a Mouse by Robert Burns, which also makes great additional material. Emma by Jane Austen. It's probably one of the easiest Jane Austen stories to get into. And even though we talked about The Telltale Heart and The Raven, I would look at The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. It's a really engaging story and has a good mix of that tension and not being sure about the supernatural element. And then finally, if we're looking at that more Victorian type of Gothic, you would have a look at The Turn of the Screw by Henry James.